Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Bughead podcast. This is a bit of an unconventional one. We are not interviewing a musician or anybody from the local scene today. Today, we are branching out and talking to Byron Vaughn, who is a documentary filmmaker here on YouTube. He's putting out some really great pieces on artists that I mostly would not have known about without these videos. Some of the best stuff out on YouTube right now. But before I start my conversation with Byron, I want to remind everybody that we released a photo zine recently. You can go down to the description to go see that. It's got a lot of friends of the pod, friends of Bughead in there. So if you want to support the channel, help me make more interviews just like this one, and get a cool zine in the process, go check it out below. All right. Welcome everybody again to the Bughead podcast. Today I got a special guest. This is a kind of a different episode. I have Byron Vaughn, who is a filmmaker documenting a variety of artists, and this is a little out of the norm. I didn't tell you this before, but this is going to be the first interview that's not with a musician. This was originally started as a local music podcast for the Massachusetts scene.
Cool. Yeah, well, I'm glad to be the first non-musician filmmaker or whatever you call me. I'm glad to do that.
I guess do you want to give the audience a idea of what you do? Kind of explain what Looking Awry is.
Yeah, so it's a documentary series that I produce. It focuses on a variety of artists from around the world and the United States. So, you know, um, they can either be visual artists, like painters, or uh, art critics, authors, anybody that I think is kind of interesting that is kind of on the outside or the periphery of, you know, the mainstream art world that I think is kind of that deserves more attention. And so we were talking earlier, uh I recently put out the Ghanaian movie poster episode, and then probably like 4 months ago, I got back from Ghana again and did one on the Asafo flag makers of the Cape Coast, who are they make these things called Asafo flags, and they're these uh, sort of Ghanaian military companies that make these military flags, but they kind of intersect with the world of art. And they're really unique, and they're only made there. They're handmade, and there's only a couple of people that still kind of do it. In fact, one of them is behind me right now. Uh, yeah. Um, and so yeah, and then I also have like a small like a fine art business selling like West African antiques and fine art. And then on top of that, we were talking about the other people that I have profiled, like Ted Barrow, uh, Taylor Morrison, people like that, like art historians as well. So that's kind of a brief kind of overview of Looking Awry and kind of what I do.
I'm excited to hear that the next episode is on. You said it was these flags are made by like people in the Cape Coast.
Yeah, they're made all over the Gold Coast of Ghana. There are these military companies called Asafo military companies who during before and during like British colonialization, these Asafo companies worked as like military companies. So, they dealt with, foreign invading tribes, and then they also uh, fought with and against the British. And then they also, uh, and with that, you had this kind of intermingling of their traditional lives and their traditional customs with, because it's coming into contact with British military custom, which is where you're getting the flags from. It's their imitation of sort of British pomp and circumstance, and they're adding their own uh, sort of they're adding their history and their cultural experience and kind of blending it with the pomp and circumstance that you would have seen like on a British flag or something. And so it becomes like this interesting tradition. Uh, and yeah, I went all up and down the Gold Coast and we visited a bunch of the different uh, they're called pasubans, which are these sort of religious shrines that are operated for the uh, that the Asafo companies use. Sometimes they used to store weapons there. They used to do ceremonies there and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, that'll be the next episode. And so
That's really cool. How did you get into selling West African art? I other than America, Ghana is the country I've spent the most time in. I did a summer there as a part of a program that at the University of Utah that was meant for medical students, but my uncle works there and he got me
yeah.
on it. So I spent a month in Kumasi, and Ghana
Oh,
has
oh,
this
yeah.
like really strong painting scene. There's a lot of, at least in Kumasi, there was an art center with tons of stalls of people selling their paintings or like crafts. Um, and there were a couple other places that we went to that like I wish if we had spent more time, I would have loved to explore it more. But it just felt like there was a visual art scene almost everywhere we went to some extent.
Yeah, so Ghana, I mean, Ghana does have a really, it, I mean, to me, it feels like a lot of the West African, like contemporary visual painters that are really successful tend to come from Ghana. I wonder if that has to do, I think partially that has to do with the fact that it's one of the more developed countries in West Africa. It's a democracy, it's relatively stable, which is kind of a breeding ground, I think, a little bit more or less for being able to, and it's an environment that's conducive for artists. And so I think that's one thing. Um, but yeah, they definitely have a lot of also really just kind of strange and unique art. The fantasy
Yeah,
weapons, the Ghanaian movie posters, the Asafo flags, like I was saying. You see when you see like contemporary art from other places in the area, like the Ivory Coast or anywhere else, it's good, but it's either kind of mimicking you know other forms of contemporary art, or it's just kind of a reiteration of tribal art. But yeah, Ghana has a very unique tendency to create it, unique visual language, unique visual grammar. They're good at that. So you were in Kumasi. Did you stay at all in Accra?
no, we didn't. We spent like a day there on the way back to the airport. I spent a little bit of time in Accra, but it was like 3 hours.
How did you get up? How did you get to Kumasi? You just took a bus?
Yeah, we took a bus out of like right out of the airport.
Was it like was it like uh something that was through the government where like they had like a place like an agreement with the university or something?
Um, it was with the so what the program was we were working with like the local health officials in the rural areas around Kumasi
Okay.
to do COVID testing, see how many people in the area had COVID, and
Yeah.
like uh, did a couple other surveys, asked some questions just to get like general knowledge on how COVID had affected the area.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm not a medical student. I went to school for digital media, but I just kind of tagged along and hung out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that was a lot of fun. It's also you have to do a lot of shit to get like a visa for
Yeah,
you have to get like the yellow fever, and then you fill out just like so much it's so much paperwork. At least on mine it was a lot of paperwork. I don't know if the university helped with y'all's, but uh
Uh, I think a little bit, but it was. I remember there was a lot of paperwork that I had to fill out, the shots, and then you have to take the the pills like
Yeah, the
every
yep.
day.
Hmm.
How did you get into selling and West African art and
Well, I mean
antiques?
that relationship came about because when I was in Ghana, I became friends with Kofi. Was my liaisons there. He's the one that runs all of if you're ordering a contemporary Ghanaian movie poster, it's going through Robert Kofi. He runs everything. There's probably 15 different Ghanaian movie poster artists working there, and he manages all of them. Um, he's like the guy that runs the whole show. And so we, obviously I was with him every day that I was there. We had a, in order for them to trust me, you have to become friends with them and then you have to be trustworthy. And so I was with him every day.
Yep.
We became really good friends because, I was obviously interested in everything that he was doing. And also on top of that, Kofi grew up as a street kid and he basically created a bill of business for himself, figuring out ways to get, um, art for foreign dignitaries. So if you're like a person, if you're you know, a U.S. politician going into Ghana and you want to get some specific, antique or some specific artifact or something, you would go to Kofi and he would get it for you. And so he had this bill of business and he wanted to kind of spread it to the US. And so I've been working with him and we've been doing that. And so it just kind of came naturally from there because I already was, there working on uh, that documentary and already had an interest in all of that stuff. And so yeah, it kind of came out of that.
How did Looking Awry come about? What inspired you to start making these documentaries? What was the inciting event?
Yeah, I mean, do you do video work outside of
So I do freelance video production professionally. I work mostly in like public access and some like a little bit of other stuff,
yeah.
some sports.
Yeah, the reason I asked that is that, people who aren't familiar with doing anything like video production wise don't understand how difficult it is.
Yeah.
And also just how much the landscape has changed in the last 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
how things get produced and like I grew up doing short films and always wanting to make movies of my own. And as I got older, like a lot of people that have aspirations of making films and doing movie related stuff, it became pretty apparent that it's like next to impossible, like the the world of video production is very difficult, even in Hollywood it's shrunk significantly. That just those opportunities aren't there. So you really have to be kind of crafty and try to figure out how to pave your own way given the
Absolutely. Yeah.
whatever limited resources. And luckily, a lot of the stuff that we have now with like digital cameras gives, if you're tenacious enough, you can do pretty much anything. You just have to be crafty with it. And
I've worked on my fair share of like no budget movies. Yeah.
yeah,
It's you can make it happen if you really want to, but it's tough.
yeah. And I think when I was young, doing the short films when I was young gave me the confidence to say, because I did them all by myself pretty much. And it gave me the confidence to say, well, if I could do that by myself and say I saved up some money, I could definitely do like a more polished version of that, as long as I keep budget constraints in mind. And I was like, well, what would be possible? And I had already been working as a visual artist and I had all of these really great friends who were visual artists that were very talented. And I was thinking, I would love to just start creating a documentary series, kind of documenting people that I find interesting. And obviously I didn't know, the Ghanaian movie posters is a perfect example. I didn't know anyone in that world, but I just set that as a challenge. How could I thrust myself into that world? And, you'd be pretty surprised what just sending it a bunch of emails and trying, being tenacious and annoying and really just going for it. That's what kind of allowed a lot of those to end up working. And so yeah, I did one with Sean Cairns. That was the first one that I had done. And and then after that I was like, well, why not just go bigger? Like why not just think of like the craziest one that you could do? And I was reading a Dave Hickey book called Pirates and Farmers, and he had a whole essay on the Ghanaian movie poster painters. That's how I discovered them. And I was totally fascinated with them at the time, and I was thinking that would be the number one documentary I'd want to make, because I'd want to go to Ghana and do that. And I go, well, what's stopping me? There's nothing really stopping me. Like I could buy a plane ticket to go over there. I already know how to do it. I can bring the camera equipment with me. I feel confident enough. I've already done another one. And so then I was like, well, then I'm just going to do that as the next one. And that's how I kind of have always, that's how I've approached everything was what's the number one thing that I would want to, the number one person or thing that I'd want to document. And I try to see if I can make that come into fruition. And so that's kind of how I've been approaching it, and that's kind of how it started and how I'm kind of doing it for right now.
You've interviewed two different artists who are skateboarders. Ted Barrow being mostly known within the skateboarding world.
Yeah.
Um, what's your connection to skateboarding, and what role do you think it plays in the art world?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I grew up skateboarding, and I think that's another thing that kind of segued into filmmaking was uh, I owned a VX 1000. I made skate videos with my friends. That was, you learn you really learn the uh, skateboarding videos really have a very specific visual language, and there's a lot of different varieties in all of the different types of skate videos. It depends if it's more of a Hesh video, or if it's, there's so many different genres of skate video, and music and the hijinks and the art development behind all of it create the entire atmosphere around the music, or it creates the entire atmosphere around the skate video. And so growing up, I did a lot of that, and I think that that helped me develop and become comfortable with editing. When you're doing that as a kid, it kind of becomes uh, a second language for you. I was never like that great at skateboarding, but I was definitely completely obsessed with it, and all my friends skated, and we skated up until into our early 20s, and I still go to the skate park occasionally. But, you know, I think that the connection between skating and art is, well, one, I think the biggest thing is it's similar to art in that you are looking at the world and you are repurposing something that has nothing to do with skating, and looking at it and trying to find all the possibilities that skating can have with a said object. Whether you're in a parking lot or you're at a stair set, these are all things that were never designed to be skated, but you're reinterpreting them for skateboarding in this creative way. And that's the same thing that an artist does. An artist looks at a bunch of inanimate objects or animate objects and is thinking, how can I repurpose this scene or visual experience that I'm having and turn it into a piece of art, like repurposing it for a creative endeavor. And that's what skating kind of already naturally does that, but it's from the sports world, but it easily segues into art. That's why there's so many great skaters that become artists, like Jerry Hsu. There's Mark Gonzalez does illustration and fine art. Uh, Ed Templeton. I mean, the list goes on and on. Even like skateboard graphic designers, Sean Clive, Sean Cliver. Like just all there's all these different segues in skateboarding, and so I think that I don't know I always like exploring that connection, especially when I see it, because I think everyone has like their own unique sort of experience, like being a skater and then segueing into art. Did you go skating?
Yeah, no, I still skate pretty regularly. I had something I was about to say. What was it? I think skateboarding really kind of makes you aware of your surroundings in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're paying attention to spots. It almost becomes like a gateway into architecture as an art form or as
Oh
like
yeah.
something interesting to you. Uh, and I think just having that kind of that eye lends itself well to being an artist.
Yeah, no, and I think the other thing that separates skateboarding from just regular sports is it's the only, or it's not the only, but it's one of the few sports where like the aesthetic judgment is like one of the primary motivating factors on whether or not skating is good. And it separates it from, and this is why normies have a hard time actually understanding skating, because you'll notice this. They'll be like, well, this guy's really good, he does really complicated tricks. Why don't skateboarders let why isn't that their favorite skateboarder? Like he's you know he's the most consistent, he does the most complicated thing. And a lot of times the skater's skater, or the person that like a lot of skaters end up liking, is somebody that maybe isn't the most technically sophisticated, but because all of the components are working in harmony, their style, the way they dress, the spots they choose, the trick selection, the music that they're choosing for the skate part, all of these things kind of coexist in an aesthetically pleasing way, and it ends up making them kind of in the skater's eye a better and more interesting skater to watch. So I think that it's like one of the few sports where like aesthetics and art play like the key component in terms of making or breaking a skater's career, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's no scores in street skating. There's no way to like objectively win the how well like a street skater in a video is graded is just on how cool that footage looks. So it's like everything has to come together in a certain way for that footage to be as sick as it can be. Um, let's see.
But yeah, just sorry, just to keep going on that tangent,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I remember when I was coming up, like I remember Papalardo came out with that, or what video was that? I remember Anthony Papalardo, was it Lakai? It might have been Lakai. Uh, and then there was like obviously that resurgence of like New York skating, which was very much in contrast to the West Coast style of skating, which was like big handrails and big stair sets. It was more like gritty, it was urban, it was like
More lines.
yeah, I was like skating at night with like like a grungy VX1000 with like a light on,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just like awing over a trash can. It's like super simple, but it was like in a lot of ways, I'm not saying that that's the best iteration of skating, but that I think illustrates my point, which is like it even in some ways that's like unsophisticated, but that's almost analogous to like certain styles of art that kind of look simplistic but have almost more feeling, or more they affect you in a greater way. Um,
Yeah.
Again, there's all of these little connections with art and skating, and yeah, you're right. Like we don't have a grading system, and that's also why street skating is kind of so it's it's never really taken a full, like a really it hasn't taken a grasp on the skate community. Like skaters don't sit around and think about who won this contest. Like we know of it, but it just we're not altogether very concerned with it. And I think that that's why it's like it's not basketball, it's not football, it's something totally different. It's, you know,
Is Looking Awry your? Oh no, you said it earlier. That you had been making short films when you were younger. But is there have there been any hurdles or like technical skills you've had to learn within documentary filmmaking as you've been making Looking Awry?
yeah, definitely. I mean, also, so I tried to do something similar to Looking Awry like 4 years ago under the umbrella of my buddy's sort of like film production company, and it was like basically the same idea. It was let's find niche people, whether they're on the internet, they're on in the art world, what have you, and profile them. And it really kind of failed. And I had to learn a lot from the failure of that and take that into looking awry because one, I just learned a bunch of things that didn't work and that were slowing the process down. Those early documentaries that I tried to make, they just took when you have too many people involved, at least for me, uh, it just makes the runtime next to impossible. It's hard to transport people. So I figured out like if I could reduce it to me and also like reduce the equipment and the complexity of it and be able to get it to have this sort of guerrilla filmmaking vibe, that it would work a lot better. Like I could go anywhere and I could do that and I could get it done within a week. Whereas if I had a big production company, with a sound guy and a light guy and somebody fucking with the camera, like that shit just isn't gonna work. Like it's gonna be too hard to get them there. We have too many cooks in the kitchen. We're gonna have too many opinions on what needs to happen. Like we're gonna be fucking around too much. And so that was one big learning lesson, was just figuring out the logistics of how am I gonna make these work. Uh, and like scaling down was big because now I could go to Mount Everest and do one. Um, Another thing was figuring out how to interview people and like getting people comfortable and like figuring out a cadence and setting myself up for success in the editing room, because there was a lot of stuff in the earlier episodes where filming a certain way or asking questions in a certain way makes it really difficult to edit in the editing room. And so it just makes putting the project together a real pain because it doesn't feel consistent, it doesn't flow. Um, that's just kind of like you learn that as you go, and you're like, fuck, I wish I didn't do it, or I didn't ask it like this, or I wish I didn't interrupt the person. That's another big one, was like you don't realize this, but you get nervous and you want to fill the negative space when somebody's answering a question and you interrupt it and you can hear your voice in the background. You're like, God, I wish I would shut up. Uh, so yeah, a lot of little things like that, um, I think have helped improve the shooting process. And then in terms of technical stuff, yeah, I mean, I guess you have to like teach yourself all the technical stuff, but really I don't know, if all of that stuff to me is pretty easy. Because it's been made pretty streamlined now. It's like not too complicated. Real
What's your setup look like? I feel like you can see it in like
Some of the shots.
some of the shots. It
Yeah, right now I'm I'm uh I'm about to change up and get a new A cam because we're gonna try to do an even bigger one soon. But I've just been using a Sony AS7 II with just a big telephoto lens and then putting it on a like some sort of like small little gimbal, um because that allows me to travel anywhere with that. I think we're gonna get a slightly bigger camera uh and keep the Sony A7 II maybe for B cam stuff. We'll see. And then just like a small lavalier mic, and then that's really it. That's all I travel with.
That's a pretty. It's a good kit. That's pretty slim down. That's
Yeah, yeah. I
portable.
mean, it'll get you to Africa. It'll get you to wherever you need to go.
That's like less than. So this channel is for the most part has been like music interviews, and I do a bunch of them in person too. And that's like smaller than my kit to do like a 5 minute YouTube interview.
Yeah,
I need to get the lavalier mics. Those are great. I use those at work sometimes, and they're always I just need to like drop the money and buy them at some point.
yeah. Those are clutch. And then, but yeah, I mean that was one thing was like before when because we were working with a big Black Magic camera and we had this big Steadicam vest and it was like, yeah, that stuff looks sick, but it's like
You don't need all that
you don't
for.
need all that shit. Like, why do I like I'm looking back at the footage and I'm like, I could have just had this on a gimbal and we could have shot way more within the time allotted with the person instead of monkeying around with the gimbal and all this. And so now obviously if I scale up and I get a when we get a different camera, we're gonna have to figure that out. But still the idea is to be like run and gun, keep it nimble, keep it lean.
Yeah, that's how you get more natural. That like the uh, I feel like it's harder to get a interviewee comfortable when there's a multiple
Exactly.
cameras and lights and stuff. You want it to be like kind of intimate and small.
That was another thing that I noticed when I first started was is everyone gets real nervous when you get a big ass light out and a big camera, they start sweating, they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to talk, they're not going to move in a way that's normal or it also doesn't open them up to having a conversation that is like conducive to whatever you're trying to get them to talk about. Like they're kind of clammed up a little bit. And so for me, also like when you don't have as many people around, it feels much more like a conversation and it feels much more relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that helps a lot when filming as well, because I noticed that big time on the first couple ones.
Um, is there a dream episode that you'd like to make that kind of seems outside of the current scope, but like one day possible?
Yeah, there was one episode. There's one that we have on the docket that is my dream episode, but I don't want to say it because I don't want to jinx it. But there was another one that fell through that I can talk about
Perfect.
that uh there was an artist in a remote part of the Amazon in Venezuela, and it was too impossible. Like I have a high tolerance for putting myself into dangerous positions and really going for it, but this was just too much. Uh, yeah. I don't know if you've ever looked into what it's like to travel to Venezuela, but it's like if you're not a proficient, fluent Spanish speaker, it's probably 98% chance that you're going to get kidnapped. You have to get like a security detail to take you places. It's very complicated and it wasn't making sense like when I was putting it all together and we ended up having to back out. And that was one that I wish I could have done because I really wanted to go to the Amazon. I've been to the Amazon, but I've never not that part of the Amazon and I wanted to film in that village. And I wanted to film with that artist. That would be one that I think would be really cool to hopefully pull off one day, especially if the political situation kind of calms down there, political and economic.
That's a really cool. Damn. How did you find that artist? How are you like?
That artist, I got exposed to him through a Brazilian art gallery. I had struck up a conversation with the owner, um, and I had just come back from Peru. Are you familiar with Werner Herzog?
Uh, Not really. No.
Well, he made this movie called Fitzcarraldo, and it was about this rubber baron named Carlos Fitzcarraldo, who the movie is about. Well, he was a rubber baron. He had this giant boat in the Amazon jungle, and yeah, well, I went and tried to find that boat in the because the real Fitzcarraldo actually had a boat outside of this town called Madre de Dios. And I tried to go find it. Um, and when I came back, this guy at a gallery was like, "We have an artist that lives with his like native tribe and makes art." Uh, and I was just like totally, I got totally obsessed with it and was like, "This is so cool." And but yeah, that's how I got exposed to it. Unfortunate that Venezuela is so dangerous.
You sound like you're well traveled. Was this Have you always been traveling a lot, or was this something that you picked up for uh, looking awry?
I think, I mean, before I was traveling a lot before Looking Awry. Um, and then it just so happened that my love of travel mixed really well with my interests in making documentaries about people around the world. It just kind of coexisted. But I mean, before I wasn't able to travel, like I hadn't left the United States until a couple of years ago, uh, because I was just broke my whole life, you know? Like I didn't even have a passport. But then once I got it and I was able to save up money, then I was like, I'm off to the races. You know, I want to do as much traveling as I can. And so,
Cool. What's like? I guess what's your favorite spot you've been to so far?
yeah, that's hard to say. I mean, you know, uh, they're all so different. We did one really cool tour where we were in Egypt and me and my buddies paid a group of like Egyptian Bedouins who were, you know, these they were historically this like nomadic desert people that have lived in the desert since before the ancient Egyptians. And you can pay them and they will take you out into the white desert of Egypt. And you just like email some guy on a website, on some sketchy website, and he'll come pick you up at like 6 in the morning in a car and doesn't speak any English, and he'll drive you like 8 hours into the desert. And we did that when we were in Egypt, and it ended up being like one of the coolest things I've ever done. Uh, it was just like super amazing.
That
Uh,
sounds incredible.
yeah, it was pretty cool. And then I guess that's kind of like a fun adventure one. I think in terms of if I'm looking to relax and I'm really looking for a vacation, I just got back from Japan and I can say that Japan was like the most I just went in with very little expectations and was completely blown away. It was like the most relaxing place because a lot of the places I go to I feel like are not relaxing and you know, they're stress inducing. And so it's nice every once in a while to go to a place that's kind of laid back.
Japan's on the bucket list for sure. What's your background in art? Are You said you were working as a visual artist earlier. What's your background and what's your involvement with the art world outside of looking awry right now?
Yeah, so I am like a lot of people, I'm just a self-taught artist. I was doing a lot of I guess you could call it like paper collage work. Did a couple of shows and like that's how I kind of had my start with Looking Awry was just, you know, I was in those circles with those people that were in the galleries in Dallas and stuff like that. Right now, just because the documentary work has like kind of taken over my life, like I'm still doing art and once I kind of get settled here, I'll probably ramp up my art practice again. But right now, like I have a lot on my docket. We filmed like 3 or 4 episodes within a 2 month span, and so I have a lot of editing to do right now. Um, but yeah, that's kind of a rough overlay of it.
Uh, that's good to know that you have like a bunch of new videos coming out. I'm hyped for it. I'm
Yeah,
hyped
yeah.
to see them. Are there any other documentarians or YouTube channels that you're inspired by to make yours? Anybody that's uh, that you're taking influence from on that?
Yeah, I think I always liked Les Blank, the documentary filmmaker who when we were talking about Werner Herzog, he did the documentary Burden of Dreams, where he followed Werner Herzog when he was in Peru making his movie. Les Blank always had I also like Werner Herzog's documentaries, all of the ones that he did. Uh, he has so many that are just like so iconic. Um, and then I would say I obviously owe a huge debt to those like early Vice documentaries, like epically layered, and those I just remember like getting on my computer and going to the Vice website and just watching those early uh when they started putting out documentaries and they were just using like handheld VHS cameras and going around. Those were always a big inspiration for me. In terms of like contemporary YouTubers, I really try to stay away from YouTubers. I really don't, well, I'm not that big of a fan of that style of editing. There's like very much uh, there's like a sort of a YouTube cadence and a YouTube way of talking and editing that I'm not the biggest fan of. And so I try to always, if I'm trying to solve a visual film problem, try to look towards those other examples that I mentioned because I think that to me those were always great examples of like elevating documentary filmmaking to be something really cool and larger than life.
The epically laters were definitely also like a an influence for me. That kind of is where I can track some of my want to do. Like I don't know if I'd call a lot of what I've done as documentarian. I guess it is, but that's a space I'm also pulling from. But you're right. Your stuff feels kind of like removed from your videos feel very removed from the the rest of YouTube. I almost like the videos that I get recommended on like the sidebar when I'm watching a Looking
Yeah.
Awry video are like from museums or foundations that like are doing a talk with an artist or something. It's kind of less of like the clickbait title, the darkest, the most evil painter you've never heard of
Yeah,
type of
uh-huh.
thing. It's outside of that kind of style of content on the platform.
Yeah, no, I think that that YouTube what is it, the bed of Procrustes, like the content now has been shaped to fit what the algorithm or whatever is pushing it in order to make it like the most like the in order for the algorithm to like it the most and push it, like you have to shape it a certain way. But I'm not entirely convinced that that is the best way to be making the like it's a lot of it is like aesthetically ugly and it I don't like it, and it like there's just other ways. Like there is good internet content. Like the epically late, like the early Vice stuff that we're talking about, that's a great example of stuff where it's like it's super simple, it feels hip, um it it feels visceral, but it's not overproduced. It kind of avoids all the problems that I'm mentioning with YouTube. And I'm sure that there are I think another guy I got turned on to is this guy Popular Front. I haven't watched all of his videos, but it looks like he does like guerrilla style journalism in like war-torn areas. And that's like another his stuff is pretty cool. Um
Yeah.
and like the I dig stuff like that. Uh I've always liked that. And I definitely think there's kind of like there's like two different intuitions when it comes to filmmaking, especially now. Like you can always tell like who falls into which camp. Uh, you know, the it's kind of hard to describe maybe, I don't know. I keep wanting to say like Marvel inspired or it's
No, okay. I see what you're trying to say. It's like there's a damn. I kind of get the idea, but it is like hard to explain. You're right.
hard to explain. It's like a certain type of guy that is like really into equipment and he knows
Exactly. Yeah, there's
he
a
knows
guy who like before he fucking makes a little video on his phone before he like ever posts anything anywhere before he ever like even finishes a script needs to have all the camera and the ring light and the
yeah.
et cetera et
He
cetera.
thinks that they think that by throwing more expensive product at it and just like smashing as many technically sophisticated types of transitions and lens flares, like just throwing tons of complexity at something that like the output is going to be better. When in reality, it's like
It's
really
overstimulating.
it's or it's just none of these are really working and like maybe you only needed to do one of those things and then focus on something totally different. Uh yeah, that's like a definite part of YouTube is that whole kind of genre of, you see it, it's like a bunch of drone shots, a bunch of this, a bunch of that. It's like it just feels it doesn't what am I looking for? There's something there. I'm on to something, but I don't know what I'm talking about.
You ever watch like a John Hill vlog?
No, but let me look it
He
up.
was like a skate vlogger. I don't know. He used to be bigger,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
this is like a post Casey Neistat kind of like
Exactly.
vlog guy.
Yes. Yes. Yes, this is exactly what I'm talking. There's something kind of there's an LA guy energy. That's another thing. It's LA
Yeah.
guy energy. It's also ego. That's another thing that's a reason I try to limit my time on camera to bare minimum. I really don't want to be on the camera.
You use a narrator. Use a different narrator in some videos.
I do. Yeah, if I can use a narrator to push the story forward, to connect to disparate pieces of content to make the story flow, I like to use a narrator. Uh, Ideally, I'd like to use nothing. I'd like to use the person speaking, but sometimes the two pieces of content are too jarring and you need to have a narrator like
Yeah.
stitch those two things together. And then under just like the if I absolutely have to, I'll get on camera. But that's another thing I think is off-putting about the YouTube uh like documentary world is there's something very kind of ego driven by it. It's I want to be in front of it. I want to be the acting star. And it's like I think that that can sometimes also ruin it.
It's yeah, you see that a lot in like there's a kind of a genre of YouTube video where the um the whole point is to like just like go to the most dangerous neighborhood in a city and like be like, "Oh, wow, look at how dangerous this neighborhood that
Yeah.
I went to is."
The whole point is just an exercise in admiring this guy is like the Don Juan. He goes in, he gets the girl, and then he walks in the dangerous neighborhood. And you don't really glean anything about the area other than the fact that this guy's like walking around drinking a beer and like being totally flagrant and like risking his life. Uh, yeah, and I think this was something that was also something I was talking about with a friend who was like, since Anthony Bourdain has died, there's like this vacuum, and now there's this like mad rush from different people who are trying to like fill that void of who's going to be the next Bourdain. And so you have this whole cottage industry of imitators that do what we're talking about, like danger tourism, where they'll just like go to a dangerous spot and they think that that is like the thing to do, which I thought was interesting.
I wish I had seen like more Anthony Bourdain than I have right now. I haven't actually watched that much. I get what you're saying. Yeah, I don't need to like. I know who he is, so I can.
Yeah, I mean,
Um.
he was the preeminent travel blog guy
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
everyone looked to as Mr. International. And when he passed away, I think that a lot of young men who grew up watching him were like, well, I want to take I want to take the throne or whatever. And like what they took away from his show is I'm gonna just go to some really dangerous place and like that'll be my whole shtick, which is like I don't.
There's a there's a lack of like appreciation for the actual location and more so for the thumbnail and title that location can get you.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're just so you're reducing the richness of the entire area and the entire experience to like some sort of uh like shock value thing. I don't know. It's just kind of like broy, or I don't know what to say.
Yeah. Do you have any other documentary series or artists or movies or any medium that you think people should look out for? Something that you think the audience uh, really needs to see?
You mean like an artist that's kind of underrepresented that
Yeah, give me like a deep cut recommendation.
yeah, let me think real quick.
Someone you think needs a shout out.
I think if you're like a young filmmaker and you're like feeling distraught because like the whole system feels like it's against you and you're, you know, you're feeling dejected because you're like, well, how am I going to make this work? I would check out there's a documentary called American Movie about the filmmaker Mark Burchard. I believe that's how I'm pronouncing his name right, but it follows him as he is making his movie Coven, and it's like super low budget. I think he lives in Wisconsin, and it's one of those heartwarming sort of all-American stories of a guy who just has a dream, and it's I don't know, anytime I'm down, I just watch that movie and it makes me feel really good. Mark is also just such a cool artist. Like you can look up his interviews outside of the documentary, and he's just like an encyclopedia of movie knowledge. Yeah, that's a good one for maybe your listeners to check out.
All right, I'm gonna watch that tonight. I think that's gonna be my next movie
It's
to
like an
watch.
infinitely quotable movie. I quote it all the time,
Hell yeah.
and it's just like, dude, I don't know. It's just like one of those rare gems that you come across, and like it ends up becoming your favorite, or at least for me. Like I watch that all the time. It just like puts me in such a good mood.
Do you have any other plugs or shout outs that you want to give before we wind things down?
Yeah, shout out to my buddy Sean Cairns, who I did the first documentary with. He's having a show in New York right now, so if this is out in time, go check it out. It's at Shrine NYC. Um, who else? I don't know. It's hard. I'm sorry. I'm maybe I'm not good for shout outs right now. But
what's your Instagram handle and YouTube channel name?
the Instagram handle is Byron Byron underscore VON Von, and the YouTube is just you can just type in Looking Awry, um, and yeah, you'll see the YouTube channel and all the documentaries, and you can go have a ball.
Awesome. Thank you for doing this. This was awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate you reaching out. That was a fun conversation.
Hell yeah.
Hopefully you enjoyed it.